And it's time for the Newsmaker show here on AM 1480 Wlea. Brian O'Neill on the phone line with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Good morning, Dr. Ostrower.
Good morning on a snowy morning here in Alfred.
Yeah, what was it? Dr. Ostrower was just saying if the border in question was in Allegheny County, there wouldn't be any question of needing a wall. It's snowy.
Yeah, snowy. People are staying at home, I suspect. So how are you doing?
Doing well, Dr. Ostrower, doing well. Wanted to ask you your thoughts looking at the different websites this morning, seeing headlines like Trump heads the border as shutdown intensifies, President storms out of meeting with Dems, emergency declaration for the wall, tests the Republicans, and shutdown bites harder.
Well, I think that a lot of people have said in respect to this whole controversy that it's political, okay, that there's a lot of politics involved. And, of course, when you're dealing with Washington, that's almost inevitable. But I think this really is a fundamentally political problem and not a migration problem per se. And I say that because what President Trump did before he became president, during the campaign of leading up to the election in 2016, is he made the wall one of his two signature issues. If you want to excite people, you talk about the wall, and he would get them to chant at his own rallies, build that wall, build that wall. Who's going to pay for it? Mexico, Mexico. It became, along with lock her up, one of the two key slogans of the campaign. Well, when you highlight it like that, then in a sense you almost have to do something about it. Let me give you, again, a historical moment that may put this into a little bit of perspective. Back in 1988, when George H.W. Bush ran for president, he said during his, not during his inaugural speech, but during the speech, his acceptance speech at the Republican convention, that he would not raise taxes. No new taxes, read my lips, he said. Well, a few years later, 2 or 3 years later, when we had an economic downturn, he did raise taxes. And it seemed to be a violation, in a sense, of trust. It seemed to be, in other words, a betrayal of what many people had believed they were voting for in the 1988 election. And it cost Bush the election in 1992. He was not reelected. That cost him a lot. And I think that President Trump at least remembers that kind of precedent. He made the wall, as I say, a key issue in 2016, and he feels he can't back away from it. Now, there are some contradictions here, because when the Republicans controlled both the Senate and the House, just until a few days ago, the president had not made this a big deal. If he really wanted the wall, he could have pressured the Republicans in both houses of Congress to fund that money. He didn't do that. He's only waited until now the Democrats have taken over the House of Representatives. But by the same token, when I say it's political, for the Democrats, it's equally political. The last thing in the world they want to do is to give Bush a victory on his signature issue. They want to win the election in 2020, and this becomes one of the means by which they're going to do it, if they can show, in other words, that the president does not come through on his promises. So on both sides, I think we have a political standoff. And if the president is going to declare a state of national emergency as a way of showing us that he's, quote, tough, that he's serious, that he's therefore going to build a wall through a state of national emergency, I think it's going to be a terrible, terrible precedent. I think that it indicates, in another way, in an important way, that the president has authoritarian tendencies, that he really does not respect the Constitution, and that he does not respect the democratic procedures that have, served this country well for the last 230 years.
Talking this morning with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, where do you see this going as far as the next election goes?
Well, it's hard to say. If he doesn't get the wall, I think he's going to be. It's going to damage him among his own supporters, among his so-called base. If he does get the wall, it's probably going to serve his interest in that sense. But we don't know at this point whether he's going to get that wall. As I say, if he does declare a state of emergency, I think all bets are off. And I might add, Brian, that if he declares a state of emergency, it's not only that he may be able to take money without going to Congress from the military, and this may be unconstitutional, by the way, but he'll do it, to take money from the military, his $5.7 billion, and he'll build that wall. But it's more serious than that, because once you declare a state of emergency, there are many other powers that that the president would have, not the least of which is going to be the power to essentially control the Internet, to muzzle the press. There are many, many ways in which a state of emergency allows for the suspension of the kind of democratic protections that we've taken for granted for years and years and years and years. This happened during the Civil War when President Lincoln suspended the right of habeas corpus, and it could easily happen in 2019 if President Trump declares a state of emergency. Trump is not a Democrat with a small d. He's not a man who understands the Constitution. I don't believe that he's ever actually read the Constitution. I remember him once saying that his favorite part of the Constitution is Article number 12, and I think that most listeners understand that there is no such thing as an Article number 12 in the Constitution. I think that we're in uncharted waters.
How about the government shutdown? Did you have any thoughts there?
Well, it's certainly serious for the 800,000 people who are now laid off, who as of today, I believe, or maybe tomorrow, will not be receiving checks. Here again, I mean, they're pawns, and the president is using them as a kind of, well, he's taking them hostage. He's claimed that, well, most of them are Democrats, as if somehow or another that gives him the right to, deny them the right to make a living. The shutdown is serious, and it's going to become even more serious. And I think the shutdown does something else, which has political implications, not only in this country but elsewhere. And that is that the shutdown suggests that the United States government, that the Trump administration is not reliable. It's not stable. It's erratic. It is. You can't count on it. And when it comes to making of treaties, support from other countries for international ventures that the U.S. may be involved in places like Iraq and Yemen and so forth, we're not going to have our friends there when we need them. We're not going to have our allies there, especially when the president, as he has done repeatedly since 2017 when he became president, when the president attacks our allies. He is more critical of our allies than he is of the Russians. And I think that, perhaps that's another discussion that we may have one of these days.
Congressman Tom Reed is kind of interesting to follow in this whole thing. Do you have any thoughts on Congressman Reed? He's opposed to the shutdown, but wants really tough border security. And I think I'm not misrepresenting his views by saying I think he does want the wall, but he's very much opposed to the shutdown. It's kind of interesting to follow Reed because on the one hand he is very conservative. On the other hand, he tries to get along with the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, as much as he can, wherever and whenever he can.
I agree with your analysis. I heard Congressman Reed on his press conference yesterday on Wlea, on Newsmaker, and I think that his bipartisan spirit comes through, and he's one of the most bipartisan members of the entire Republican delegation in the House of Representatives. I think he takes that very seriously, and I think his work with what they call the Problem Solvers Caucus is testimony to that. I think he wants border security, but then again, I think that Schumer wants border security. I think that Nancy Pelosi wants border security. You want it. I want it. I think we all want it. The issue is, do we need a wall to provide that border security? And I'll offer you a very personal opinion in respect to this, and that is that, in some areas, we do need a wall. Okay, there are porous areas of that border. Okay, 1,500 miles or whatever it is, that can utilize a wall, and we have a wall in some areas already, as you probably know. But in many, many other areas, we don't need a wall, and especially a wall that's going to cost us. President Trump says $2 million initially. And then he said, well, maybe $4 to $5 million. And then it was up to $8 million. And now we're looking at maybe billion dollars. Now maybe $25 billion. And that doesn't even include the cost of the purchase of land that we're going to take from people who own that land as a result of the principle of eminent domain. So, do we need that kind of a very, very extensive wall? The answer is no. Do we need some wall? I think the answer is yes. But border security should not be confused with a wall. A wall is one small part of a larger subject called border security, and that border security is going to be, we can implement it through electronic means, through additional personnel who are, guarding the border and whatnot. And I think that there's yet another issue that's probably worth mentioning at this point, and that is that in the year 2000, there were approximately 1,600,000 people who illegally crossed that border. Okay, 1,600,000. Last year, in 2017, or I guess it's a little more than a year ago now, in 2017, there were approximately 400,000 people. In other words, the number is approximately 1/4 of what it was. And what that means is that this is not a national emergency. The situation today is much, much better than it was 15 or 20 years ago. In fact, those numbers of illegal crossings have been declining rather steadily through the George Bush administration, through the Obama administration, and now continuing through the Trump administration. So I think, again, we have to keep things in perspective. And that perspective suggests to me, at least, that this is not an emergency, and therefore we do not need a declaration of a national emergency, which may threaten our liberties, our constitutional liberties, and we ought to just kind of calm down here. Let me go back, if I may, to Tom Reed. I think that Tom Reed has a very, very good sense of the need to cooperate with both parties. I have often said, even on this program, that the genius of American politics has been our willingness to compromise. Okay, going all the way back to 1789 when George Washington became president. That genius of American politics, kind of breaks down once, and that was during the 1850s as we drifted towards civil war. But otherwise, the concept of compromise, the importance of compromise has served us well. And I think that there is probably no congressman better suited than Tom Reed to fully understand that.
It'll be interesting to see how much legislation Nancy Pelosi allows Reed to get through, if there will be any political payback. He supported legislation that Pelosi wanted, but he did not support Pelosi when the vote came up for her to get the job as House Speaker, because Pelosi did not put through all the reforms that Reed's Problem Solvers Caucus wanted. So that'll be kind of interesting to watch, Gary.
But the key thing that he did support is a change in House rules, which will allow a more democratic, again with a small d, more democratic processes for congressmen of both parties to move bills, to have hearings on bills, to have them considered. Because at this point, what we have is a Congress. This is true in the Senate, and it's equally true in the House of Representatives. We have a Congress that is really dominated, that is controlled, if you will, by leadership. And that means by Mitch McConnell in the Senate, who, when he doesn't want a bill to be discussed, not even discussed, much less voted on, he can prevent it from being discussed. And by the same token, in the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House can do exactly the same thing.
We're speaking live this morning with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with Dr. Ostrower in just a moment.
Hello, this is Brian O'Donovan, President and CEO of St. James Hospital. I want to update you on all the great things that are happening here.
The big news is our new medical office building. Almost all outpatient services are now located there. The hospital at 411 Canasteo Street has the emergency room, inpatient care, and full imaging and lab. The new hospital will open in early 2020. Check our new website for updates.
I welcome your feedback. Please don't hesitate to contact me.
And before we get back to Dr. Gary Ostrower, let's check in with meteorologist Rob Carolyn.
Hey, good morning, Brian O'Neill. Looking at a little bit of light snow over the western and central parts of New York State this morning, associated with cold air moving across the relatively warm waters of the Great Lakes. We've had some pretty good lake effect snows down to our west, out across Chautauqua and Cattaraugus counties. And this is going to ease up today. Wind direction is going to kind of change direction. That'll take the lake effect snow, bring it to an end later this evening. But if you are out and about today, there'll be some more snow showers and flurries. We're breezy 25. Watch for some slick spots anywhere from a coating to an inch may fall. Tonight, the snow will end. We're mostly cloudy overnight, 10 to 15. Arctic air mass continues to head our way tomorrow, Brian. Sets us up for a partly sunny day overall. We're 20 to 25. Lots of clouds, cold tomorrow night, 10 to 15. Clouds Saturday, 25 to 30. By Sunday, we're partly sunny at around 30. Brian, sunrise earlier today was at 7:40, and the sun will set tonight at 4:58.
Thank you, Rob. Back with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, do we have time for a little history?
Well, we do, but Brian, I want to make one point, if I may. Really kind of 2 points about what we've just been talking about, and then I'd be happy to talk about what happened in history. Number one is that President Trump has essentially offered himself and advertised himself as a, quote, great negotiator. No one, he said, no one negotiates better than I do. Well, if he's a really great negotiator, one would think that we would already have a resolution to this government shutdown. And the other thing is that, you know, he has said more than once that Mexico is going to pay for the wall. And then he said, well, and this is fairly recently, Mexico has already been paying for the wall. How? Because of the new trade agreement, the new NAFTA agreement, which he refuses to call NAFTA, but the new trade agreement with Mexico. So the Mexicans are trading with the wall. Okay? If that's in fact the case, then why shut down the government? If the Mexicans are in fact paying for the wall, then there's no need for a government shutdown. And so I think that, you know, it's not only an issue of, a political issue over the issue of immigration and so forth. I think it's an issue having to do with his own honesty. This is a man who has real difficulty telling us the truth. And when you don't tell people the truth, you're essentially not respecting them. And I don't think he respects any of us.
Dr. Ostrower, on this day in history, I'm looking at the History Channel's website as always for this. World War I, 1923. Harding orders U.S. troops home from Germany. And this is several years after the end of World War I. I would have thought that, you know, what the war went from, 1914 to 1918 in Europe and 1917 to 1918 for America. What were they doing staying in Germany that long after the war, Dr. Ostrower? Tell us that.
Well, I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. You know, you often ask me questions that, fortunately, I do know the answer to. There were, following the armistice. So remember, what happened in November of 1918, November 11th, was an armistice. It was a truce. It was not a peace treaty. It was not the end of the war. It was a pause in the war. And the peace treaties would not come until later. And the peace treaties are going to be signed in 1922 and 1923. After the last of the peace treaties was signed, there was a peace treaty with Turkey, which had been an ally of Germany during the war, another one with Austria